a piano while we were recording. We still had to use that recording because we didn't have enough time.
Wow.
Incredible. And Jeff Emmerich, as Rod mentioned, was the engineer on that. Now, he was known for getting a certain drum sound for Ringo's kit and stuff like that. But did you guys did you want any relation to like some of the sounds that the Beatles created, or did you leave it up to him to get what he thought was best? How was it working with him?
I think as I recall, for a start, I was lucky enough to get a new drum kit when we won our first competition, and the only way I thought was it's going to be a Ludwig kit, because if it's good enough for Ringo, it's good enough for me. It turns out John Bonham as well from.
But actually, I remember doing Time to See. Jeff Emmerich only did the recording on 2 or 3 tracks on the album, but he did Time the Season, and I remember thinking at the time that he got a magical, the way the toms worked in with the bass line, it just sounded very special actually. And the funny thing was, we saw Jeff Emmerich a week before he died. We did a concert in Los Angeles with Arcade Fire. And we talked to Jeff for about an hour afterwards, and at the end of it he said, don't forget, we've got to record again, really, really soon. He said some lovely things about us in his book as well, and about recording with us, and that's what we really did intend to do. And a week later, we got the phone call that he died just suddenly. But I think he wasn't. I think we felt that he did. I certainly felt he got an exceptional and an unusual sound on Time of the Season, and it was quite magical actually. And I know that George Martin reckoned that on Revolver that Jeff was really more responsible for the sound as a really young guy there, than anybody else. And he was a sort of fledgling engineer at the time, but they just left it to him, and he would say, he would change what was on the board, and he'd say, you call that top? And he would just turn it 100% up, turn the whole thing fully up. And he had some wonderful ears, I think.
And I think one of the things with him, this is what he said to me, was that everyone who came into Abbey Road would say, can you get us the Beatles sound? Can you get us the Beatles sound? But we didn't do that. We went in and we just said, just work your magic. Just do what you think is appropriate for us. And I think he really liked that we weren't in search of the Beatles sound.
And it's funny, you mentioned Abbey Road, you mentioned Jeff, just a young apprentice and left to his own devices, if you will. And with a buddy of yours, Colin, Alan Parsons, same thing. Well,
yes.
Yeah, Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, he's practically credited as the producer, even though technically he wasn't. But
well, Alan is a wonderful engineer and producer, and a lovely, lovely guy as well. And we all first met him. He was an assistant engineer at Abbey Road when we recorded Odyssey and Oracle. And I got to know him, and I realised that he lived just up the road from me. And so we used to meet some Saturday mornings in the Flask in Hampstead Village, and we would drink a couple of pints of Young's beer. I do recommend it. And then he first started talking about the idea of being a producer, this producer being a central figure in recording an album. And he was said to me, would you like to do it if I got this together? And I couldn't do the first one because I was living actually in California and they were recording in London. But I did the second one, and I did about 5 after that. So from Pyramid, where I did The Eagle Will Rise Again on Pyramid, and then from there onwards, and I did Old and Wise on Eye in the Sky, and many others with Alan. And he's another wonderful, wonderful engineer. But of course, he's known now as a producer. But he was an engineer when we first met him.
I had mentioned about whether or not some of those albums influence Odyssey and Oracle. I want to go back further. I want to kind of talk to you guys about some of your musical influences. And Rod, I'm going to end with you because it's something that you said that started this whole conversation this morning. So, Chris, for you, growing up there in England, what was it? Was there music in the household as a kid? What inspired you to want to become a musician?
My father played double bass and semi-professional. But then, first thing I remember hearing is Rock Around the Clock. And that was a big change. And then Elvis Presley, Hound Dog, that really moved. He suddenly got excited what music could do. I think Rod had the same thing as well.
My father, for his blessings, played the violin. And he was very keen for me to learn to play the violin. But I was listening to the underground radio stations and I was hearing rock and roll for the first time and I thought, violin, maybe not. So, but drums came into my life and here we are.
Was it rock and roll drummers though, or was it like, some jazz guys like Cozy Cole and stuff like that?
Yes, it was to a certain extent. Maybe 75% rock and roll drummers and 25% jazz drummers. So I was influenced by all of them and trying to do all the various things they did. So I was listening to everyone and picking a little bit from him and him and him and making it my own.
Colin?
Well, I remember when I was really young that on my mother's side, she had 5 brothers and they all played 2 or 3 different instruments. So I probably was influenced when I was really young, before I was 10 or something like that, by them. And then I managed to talk my parents into buying me a guitar when I was about 10 or 11 years old because I loved rock and roll and I started to explore playing the guitar when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I joined the band as the guitarist. I was never the singer. Rod was the singer for a short while. Actually, Rod was the singer for about half an hour. And I was the guitarist for about half an hour. And I got eased out because I'm absolutely hopeless. And I could feel these burning eyeballs going into the back of my head every time I made a mistake, which was just about every song. So I started off as a guitarist, but then I either got promoted or demoted, I'm not quite sure. And then I became the lead singer.
And then, Rod, the reason why I wanted to end that line of questioning with you was because it goes back to the top of our conversation, and there was a statement you released when you found out that the Zombies were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I'll just start it out for you. It started in 1956, and it started with your cousin, the late, great Zombies, Kinks bassist, Argent bassist, Jim Rodford. And if you'd kindly pick up the story from there.
Well, Jim, you're absolutely right. Jim was my cousin. He was 4 years older than me. And when I was 11 years old, I used to constantly go down to his place, which was maybe 250 yards away from where we lived. And I was in love with music, but it was mainly, the only music I'd really heard around that time was some very sort of anodyne, popular music of the time. People, I don't know, like Perry Como and, Rosemary Clooney and things like that. And I wasn't really particularly knocked out with that. My mother used to love the sort of lollipops, the very well-known pieces of classical music, which is what I heard. But anyway, I still loved some of those, but I was down at Jim's house one day and he was playing some Bill Haley, and I thought, yeah, it's okay, I sort of half got into it. But then he said, well, let me play you this. And he changed my world in 3 minutes. And he played me Elvis singing Hound Dog. And that, I've always felt, for me, that was my introduction to black music by proxy. Because at the time, that was the only sort of rhythm and blues inspired stuff that I ever heard. And it was that made me want to search out the rawest rock and roll I could find. People like, obviously, Little Richard. It was a great time for rock and roll around that time. Little Richard, and all the other great people who were playing. And very soon discover people like Big Mama Thornton, who did the original version of Hound Dog. And then very soon after that, Ray Charles sort of moved me into that whole thing. But also Jim was in one of the earliest electric bands in the whole of the south of England. And I went along to see them at the age of 11. Jim was 15. I was completely blown away. And I thought, I have to form a band as soon as I possibly can. And still all around that time, I was still, it was a great time for music. I was discovering the Miles Davis group of around 1958, which was absolutely fantastic. And like many other English musicians, I was finding and discovering the urban blues people like Chuck Berry, etc., and the older blues people, you know, like Muddy Waters, etc. So it was really an incredibly exciting time. But Jim was really my mentor for a lot of my life. He was the first person to hear She's Not There when it was first recorded. He loaned us all the gear for our very first rehearsal. And at the time, with all the Blue Tones gear, we thought we sounded pretty hot. But later, in fact, just a couple of years ago, he confided to Colin that he thought no chance when he first heard us. But, you know, that continued. I formed Argent with him. He was a founder member. And then, of course, as many of you know, he was on he was the bassist on the biggest selling Kinks album, I think, in America, and the #1 single of Come Dancing. And it's, you know, a real tragic loss to me as from a personal point of view, and from the point of view that he's always been there throughout our whole career. And of course, he was the first person I went to when Colin and I got back together again about 19 or 20 years ago now. And he suddenly went. It was after playing in Florida. He went. He had a slight virus, a cold virus. He went home. He was really jet lagged, and his wife Jean, who a lot of you know, because a lot of you have met Jean on these cruises. She went to bed. Jim came up maybe 3 or 4 hours later, tripped on the stairs, fell backwards, and as far as we can work out, hit his head on a vulnerable point, and that caused heart failure, and he was gone, just like that. And it's very, very sad, but that was definitely the moment that turned me on to rock and roll.
And he'll no doubt be with you, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in spirit as well.
Absolutely, and I know the other day we got a message saying that this year's Grammys, they put up a big in memoriam photograph of Jim. So that was really cool, I think.
Really nice. Chris and you, back down to the two of you. When did you know that the Zombies were onto something? That this was going to be more than just a bunch of school kids knocking around? That, you know, we're not bad.
Well, it was when our first recording session when we won a contest. He said, "Well, will you write something?" Rod wrote "She's Not There," and I wrote another track. And Colin nearly finished them because the engineer we were recording with was drunk. He'd been at a wedding all afternoon, and he was very insulting, and he passed out. We had to carry him out of the studio. Colin said, I thought, I don't want to be recording anymore. But the assistant engineer was Gus Argent, so he was the one who did She's Not There. But I forgot what the question was.
I think in our beautiful young naivety, we were just absolutely thrilled to be doing what we were doing at the time. And when we started listening back to what we'd been recording, in our wonderful naivety, we just thought it was going to be huge and massive.
I think for me, the first time I just dared to think there might be a future for us, we went into a big rock and roll competition. I've got to be honest, I felt self-conscious that we were even going into a competition. I thought, you know, nothing's going to happen. But it was 10 bands a night for 10 weeks, so there was 100 bands. And blow me down, we won it. We won it. And I just thought, maybe there's a chance for us, you know. You just start to dream at that point. And winning that competition led to us going to our first recording session. And in that session, as the guys just said, we recorded She's Not There, and we were off and running. So in a very short period of time, we went from being a school band to an international hit band who are traveling all around the world. It's a little confusing, but it's great fun.
And you, have you missed it these last? I mean, I know you came back 15 for a couple shows and then 17, but before that, or no, living in Spain is really what it's all cracked up to be. So you can give a rat's ass about touring.
Very interesting. Yes, as I think I said earlier, in the gap between our first incarnation and where we are now, I've always continued to play. I worked for CBS Records for a while, and I played on quite a few of the records that came out as a session drummer. And in the last 10 years, I have been living in Spain, and I have some wonderful friends out there. And I have a band out there, and they're called the Geckos. 3 cheers for the Geckos. Thank you. And I've been playing with them and having the most fun that I've ever had in my life. Little thinking when I moved there that I was going to be playing again. And how funny it is that playing with them has returned my love of the drums. And so I was really ready when the guys decided to redo Odyssey and Oracle, so I was really up for it.
And Chris, you've stayed active, but as you mentioned earlier, behind the scenes, content with that, or have you ever missed the road and being...
Hey, it's been great. We still like each other, and when we do Odyssey and Oracle, we do it exactly as we recorded it from beginning to end. That's fun. But then Colin and Rod going on doing new things. It's having the new stuff as well as looking back at the old stuff, which is the pleasure, really is.
And that does bring us full circle. I know there's been some new music in the works. What can you guys tell us about that?
Well, we had, as a lot of people know, we had an album out in late 2015, and we were completely knocked out because Billboard took the trouble to phone us while we were on tour and say that it was in 100 album sales charts, which was just felt fantastic to us. Thank you, and that's very important to us because without that feeling of being able to still create and the excitement of putting things together in the way we always have done, that's why we were in the business in the first place. And without that, I don't think Colin and I would be still playing. And we've just started to think about a new album now. I know I've got a couple of ideas for new songs, and we're just starting to play them over in soundcheck, etc., etc. So I hope sometime this year we're going to be starting on a new album as well.
Yeah, Colin, what's your thoughts about that? I guess it's. I understand certainly having new music. It's what you do. It drives me nuts when people they go, "Who have you interviewed lately?" And I mention someone. They're still around. Yeah, they're still around. I mean, I know everybody's life has gotten busy, and you kind of lose track of who's on the road, who's recording. But this is what you guys do.
It's my brother-in-law is Paul McCartney's recording engineer, and he told me the story about the interview that Paul was having, and I think it was an Irish lady who was interviewing, and she said, no, it wasn't, it was an Israeli lady, I think, but said, why are you still doing this? She said, you've got more money than I could possibly imagine. She said, you don't have to do this anymore. And he said, I beg your pardon. And she said, well, you don't have to do it. He said, it's what I do. What else am I going to do? And I still wake up in the morning and think, my God, well, firstly, what a strange way of making a living, sort of creating music that, you can have a melody that bores people to tears. You can change one note and it can move people to tears. It's a very odd way to earn your living, really, to do that. But to wake up each morning and think, I'm one of the small percentage of people who's managed to earn a living all my life by doing what I would otherwise get up and pay to do. And that's the answer to that question, really. That's why it's so important.
Well, also, I think for all of us, the big thrill is to be involved in the beginning of a new song, to see the spark of an idea of a new song, and then you see it develop through rehearsals and in the studio, and then you get the pleasure of taking that song out and playing it live. It's such a thrill, that whole journey of seeing a song develop out of thin air, and then you go out and you play live, and that's what energizes us. that's what makes us want to keep playing. And I think that if we took the element of new music out of it, I think the Zombies would sort of peter away over a period of time. That's the thrill, is to be playing new music. We love to play the old classics too, but it's the new music that keeps us energized.
Well, as Dave Mason said, there are no old songs, only good songs. So, but the second part of that question is, so I get it completely, pushing the envelope, trying to still perhaps come up with the perfect song, the quintessential song, if you will, because no artist is ever satisfied with anything they've ever done. Let's face it, that's usually the thread that is common amongst all of you. But then when it comes to now albums and stuff, in today's day and age, it's very different, and a lot of artists will say it's not worth the time and effort. I mean, we make the money we make is from touring. It's not going to be from album sales and stuff. So that's where do you sit on the fence in terms of that, and how do you kind of wrap your heads around that dilemma?
There are still billionaires in the business, but they all own streaming companies now, unfortunately. And I think it's a real shame that so many musicians have been deprived of a lot of their livelihood. I mean, I stream stuff. It's out there all the time, and it's just a very easy thing to do. If you hear someone's got a new album out, you just have to switch on and stream it, you know. But you can see from your royalty statements that something might be played 100,000 times, and you get pennies out of it. And I think it's a real shame, because it stops the process of invention to some degree, because musicians just can't afford to.
We can't afford to lose new young musicians. It's a very important medium. Music affects people, moves people, and we can't afford to lose it. So young groups don't get the opportunity to do this. That's the change at the moment.
Yeah, it's very important to certainly, keep creating and trying to become your own person, if you will. Is there some new music today that's really piqued your interest? Do you guys seek out new music by younger bands, younger artists? Chris, I'll start with you.
You shouldn't start with me, because my sons keep trying to introduce me, and some of them, the Lemon Twigs was a very interesting one, because they're inventive, and then I keep being introduced to young people, but I'm getting to the age where I can't remember their names, Can't even remember my son's names now.
And you, what about yourself? New music, anything catches your ear, or you just...
Interesting question. Not an awful lot, I've got to say, but I'm well aware that, of course, it's just as important music today as it was then. So I listen to it, yes, but don't know.
You can't remember either.
I can't remember either.
I think that often the music that's most important to you is the music you listen to in your formative years. So between sort of 14 and 24, that music stays with you for life, and it's certainly true with me. The only new music I hear is when my daughter's at home with us and she's playing music very loud, and instead of saying, turn the music down, I'm always shouting up the stairs, what's that? Who's that person you're playing? That's when I get to know about who the new artists are. But there's a singer-songwriter I'm listening to at the moment, a lady singer-songwriter in the UK called Judy Zook. I do recommend her to you. She writes the most wonderful songs, and she's got a really beautiful voice. So Judy Zook's well worth listening out for.
Rod, for you?
Well, I do echo what Colin was saying, and I think it's an age thing to some degree. I still find myself listening to things that turned me on over an earlier part of my life. I mean, I still listen to early Ray Charles things, particularly the early times. I don't know really. I mean, I still love the music that I heard then. Occasionally, I think it's an age thing. When you're 18 years old, you go out to parties and you hear everything that's there without even thinking about it. And there's a grapevine that goes on, and you hear things that pique your interest, and that you really like.
I just want to interrupt Rob for a minute about going to parties. And there was a party we went to when we were about 19 or 20.
Yeah.
And we played a whiter shade of pale. And I just thought I'd mention that because Procol Harum, wonderful band, are on the ship. We played whiter shade of pale all night.
Well, it wasn't us. It was the parts.
Everyone, yeah.
You know,
So it started,
one record on all night long. and
It
was
just
White
went on
Shade
from
of
like
Pale.
9 o'clock till 9 o'clock in the morning. We
Yeah.
just played that one record.
I know that was crazy. But I mean, I do echo what Chris said. When I do hear something, and it's often the young band that wants to meet us. And the Lemon Twigs were very kind about, you know, loving our music, etc. So I listened to them, and I absolutely loved their first album in particular. And there's a song called "I Want to Prove to You." There's another song on that album called "These Days," which I thought had complete originality, influences from the most unexpected places, but soulful as well. And I did like that, particularly that first album, very much indeed. But I mean, I'm sure there's some great music out there, but I probably just haven't heard the new stuff.
Well, it is amazing that, you know, we're sitting here 50 some odd years later and your music still gets played. There's not a day that goes by that you don't hear one of the songs on the radio. These people wouldn't be here if they didn't enjoy what it is that you put forward and the show that you did. And if you, boy, I finally, as I mentioned, this is the 5th cruise I've done, and this is the 4th one for you guys, I think. Every year, there's been a conflict, and I could never get to your show, whether I'm hosting another Q&A, whatever. Well, I went last night, and I had to leave like 20 minutes in because I had to go MC Alan Parsons. Turned out they were running behind. They said, no, we're just going to go on. I said, oh, good. Got right back up and sat for the rest of your show, and I was just blown away. And I guess you could say sometimes I've become a bit of a jaded journalist. I live in New York City, so you get a chance to see everybody and their mother comes through town. But I just left with the biggest smile on my face last night. It was just such a fun show. The playing was excellent. The sound was great. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you very much. And as we wrap up here now, just a couple of housekeeping things. You're going to be leaving this ship and back out on the road. Where can we see you? You got some. You're pretty busy. And Colin, you're doing double duty because you're also doing some solo band shows as well.
Yeah. Well, I've just done a solo tour across the northeast of the States, and it was freezing. Yeah. It was nice to be out in the sun. Yeah, we're going to be playing tonight, so please come along if you get a chance to see us tonight. And then later on, I'm going to play with my solo band, which will be fun. And it's totally different songs. It's not going to be a Zombies thing, it's a totally different thing. And then Rod and I take the Zombies on a tour across the south of the States after the cruise. We're going through Florida, across to Texas. So if you get the chance to come and see us, please do come.
So busy days ahead for everybody.
Yes.
But
No peace for the wicked.
But the biggest date of all in the foreseeable future is March 29th at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York. And I'll just leave you with this. Not only is this a great thrill for all of you, but I asked you about your influences, and the best part is now is that the names Rod Argent, Colin Blunstone, Hugh Grundy, and Chris White are going to be right up there with Elvis Presley, Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, the Beatles, the Moody Blues. The list goes on and on. Congratulations, it's long overdue. The Zombies 2019 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees. Thank you very much.